I like celebrating.
It was like a month ago, yeah. What it says? Nuke America?
Pray again.
Oh. He's wearing new glasses. What's going on?
Yeah.
What are you guys doing here?
You know. Marshawn Lynch, you already know why I'm here.
Sebastian, you're 18? Sophia, you're 18?
Yeah, I turned 19 next week, though.
Ooh, that's a good age.
So what are you going to do?
When I go to Disneyland.
Well, you're not 10.
Yeah. I still love it.
Disneyland?
Yeah.
You don't get like sick doing the rides?
No, not at all.
Who's going to take you?
My mom.
Hello? What did you say? Yeah. Fine, how are you? Well, good luck at Disneyland. You're going to take your friends?
Yeah, I'm bringing one of my friends.
Boy or girl?
Girl.
Good job. I think you emailed me, no?
And I addressed you properly this time. First one, you just said email me, and so I just rushed to type what I spoke about. This time, genuinely addressed you.
Oh, you're very kind.
So I think that you will reply.
I will go undelete your message.
Thank you. I want to check out check myself.
Yeah. Jamal, what's going on? Nathan? How are the sick dead people?
Still dead.
What is that? Oh, that's
I
fine.
had a drone.
Matt, anything new?
I know.
Does it involve a woman?
I know.
Ah, it's useless.
But I do have a relevant question.
Please.
Last time I asked you, how do you know as a student that you should work with a teacher? You said like they should be a magnet, you should be a paper. Now, what if somebody wants me as a teacher and I don't want to teach this dude at all? Like, not even a little bit. So how do you teach a bunch of people that you really don't want to?
Look, I do this every day.
Are you speaking about just your situation or just teaching and learning in general?
I mean, obviously, I just care about me, but if you could make it general, that would be helpful.
That'd be better, yeah.
Yeah.
But can we like do this in like 5 minutes? Some foreplay would be good. Foreplay, it's just, just to get things moving a little. Yeah. Hi, we're doing foreplay. So, anything else before I go straight to that?
I have a question, but I don't think it's anybody.
What is it?
What creates narcissism?
That's actually, so the story that mythology is an interesting thing, and Narcia is a figure in the world of mythology. And one of the problems with these particular stories is that different books give you different ways of looking at these figures. The one that I have enjoyed for the past many, many thousands of years is that it's a figure who's very confused and goes on this quest to figure out who they are, what they ought to do with their lives. But they come to realize, very much like what Jean-Paul Sartre had argued in his play No Exit, that other people are hell. If you and I are in a relationship and I come to you and say, Jessica, do you love me? You may say yes, but I have no way of knowing if you're being honest or truthful. And Leah, hello, how are you? But because I desperately need you and because I desperately want to be in this relationship, I have no choice but to trust what you say, but deep down knowing full well that there could be a good possibility that you're also, because of your own needs, will have no choice but to lie to me. And Sartre would argue then that, this is just the way the world works, that people lie to one another all the time. And you say you love me, but I doubt it, and I don't really know if I have any qualities that are lovable. How can I know? How can I be sure? How can I trust you? How can I trust my own self and my own judgments about you or me or whatever? And so that was the position that Narcia occupied for the longest time. And it was symbolized as sitting by this pool of water in hopes of getting a reflection of yourself. But, you had all these wrinkles or tiny waves in this pool of water. And so every time you look down to see your own face, your own reflection, it's all wrinkled up. You don't really know what you look like. And so I go on this quest to find looking for a pool of water that's calm, not moving at all, so it could be still. And once you look into this still pool of water, you see your own reflection for the first time. And so Narcia is someone who's desperately looking for love, desperately looking for a clear sense of who and what they are. And it does make you angry, if you have never had parents who cared for you or loved you, there is this yearning inside you, and you go around, but the problem is your foundation is so broken up that you can't really trust or have faith in other people and the emotions they express towards you. And so you have a tendency of destroying everything that you touch. Okay, it's good to see you, Leah. If you need the office, let me know. Okay, take care. Bye. All I know is just a great story. It's a story about someone who just grows very tired of being lied to from their own inside as well as outside. And then they go on this quest to figure out if they really do have an identity that has nothing to do with society, with politics, with media, with parents, with friends. And then they eventually find one. And once they find it, they sit still. So Narcia is about self-love. But it really depends on what sort of self you're talking about. You have a self that is created by your parents, you have a self that's created by your temperament, you have a self that's created by reading books, your own personal experiences, and then you have a self that, as the Indians would say, it's like an onion. And you have all these layers, what they call persona or psychology, psyche. Hello. You look weak. Yeah. And so, little by little, you begin to unpeel this onion until you get to the middle and it's empty. And that's the self you're actually looking for. An identity that cannot be hurt by friends, cannot be hurt by media, cannot be hurt by the grade I give you, that there is something profoundly solid about you. Assalamu alaikum. So, that's Narcia. And it goes back to his question to some extent, because the truth is, I think imagine that you and I meet somewhere and I intuit that there is something very solid about you, but it's under an avalanche of just life's trash. You know, and if Freud is right, life can only cause hurt and pain and disappointment. That's the function of life. It makes you feel insignificant. But I intuit that there is something about you that life can't touch. And I want to give that to you. But for me to give that to you or show that to you, I have to remove these other parts that live inside you. And you can't do it by force. It's not possible. And you can't do it if someone doesn't like those things to be removed. So I have to create this relationship. In other words, I'm in the position of giving. You're not in the position of receiving. So I have to make that possible. Which means that I have to, I suppose, impose certain ways of advertising myself to you. Taking you out for a cup of coffee, but never crossing a line. I don't want to know your story. I don't want to tell your story. I just want to just have a cup of coffee with you. And little by little, I gain your trust. And the more trust I get from you, the more faith you will have in me. Which means that you will give me more power. And as your faith and love and trust from me grows, you will open up more. As you tell me more of your stories, I will remove some of the powers that these stories have on your psyche. You know, and the problem with that is it takes a long time. You know, if, for example, I had something to teach you, and I felt that you were actually interested in learning those things, there are a couple of things, and this is, you know, initially the component of love. It revolves around the realm of eros. You really have to be attracted to my physical body, to the way I speak, to my eyes, to my body language, to my office. You know, that when I come to campus at 6 o'clock, you have to be there waiting for me. And ultimately, my office and my physical presence need to be the sun in your orbit. You're the earth, I am the sun. You revolve around me. And that's how it is. Now, because in the Western culture, the student-teacher relationship doesn't really exist, and it's usually romanticized, and it's usually sexualized, this narrative won't work unless you happen to be with someone for a long time. So initially what's going to happen, if there is again something, hello Oscar, something I need to give and something you need to receive, you really need to fall in love with my physical life, including me calling and say, Jessica, my wife and my kids and myself are having dinner tonight. My parents may join us as well. Won't you come over? Now, you will either say yes or a no, okay? If you say yes, it doesn't mean that I have your full trust. It just means that, you know, you just like to come over, okay? And I have to repeat this over and over and over again until you say, you know what? My home feels like a strange place to occupy. I like to be at Amir's place. Okay. Now, it's very natural to romanticize a situation, and oftentimes it does become romanticized. You know, you will say, well, what's the difference between loving my boyfriend and loving Amir? And the truth is nothing. One simply has more depth than the other. One simply contains more awe and more mystery than the other. That's the only difference. Then there comes a point where I am no longer interested in having an emotional rise from you, you know, and now it moves into philo. Philo is, there are certain concepts, there are certain ideas, there are certain, say, do's and don'ts that live inside my intellect, and I want to impart those to you. It's no longer about me giving you physical food. Remember the saying in the Gospels that Jessica does not live by bread alone, that there is a physical bread, but there are moments you look at your companion and say, you know, it's great that you and I can sit and you know, have dinner and watch TV, but I'm looking for like intellectual conversation, something that's meaningful. And all of a sudden you're saying, I want nourishment, but it's no longer going to Round Table or In-N-Out. I want something different, okay? If you've seen that show on TV, canceled now, Ray Donovan, There's a scene where the wife says, and they've gone to therapy, and the wife looks at husband Ray Donovan, who has a checkered past, and says, I don't want to F anymore. I need you to see me when we're making love. And it's something that he doesn't really understand because of his background and because of just the habitual or physical interaction. And what you're saying is, I want that, but I want it to come with a different set of meanings and perspectives, okay? And he kind of just walks away because he's not at that stage just yet. So philo is no longer you sitting and crying or you sitting and romanticizing the experience that you and I have. What I want from you is philo, okay? I need you to be around my intellectual space now. And it's very, very, very difficult. Which means that if you want to have an intellectual relationship with me, a couple of things need to happen. You need to know my culture, and that's the thing about teacher-student relationship. Every teacher has his or her, and the other thing I should say, and this may upset some of you, women make great students, bad teachers. And by teachers, I don't mean in academia, okay? Men make awful, awful, awful students. But should you find one, they'll make great teachers, okay? So for the most part, in the spiritual, esoteric tradition, women should always remain students and men should always remain teachers, okay? A man who's a novice teacher is always bad. A woman teacher will always be bad, always. Okay. So there comes a point where you need to understand my culture. Now, that is a laborious task. First, I am Persian. Now, like very many of my students, you may have the desire to go to my country, learn the language, learn this, learn that. It's not necessary. Okay? Every teacher is seasoned differently, and you need to understand what that seasoning looks like and how it was created. And that changes the way you begin to look and see things. Remember, the task of a student and the task of a teacher is to make sure that the student has the power now to look at the world, experience the world, interpret the world through the eyes of his or her teacher. Your eyes don't work. Your eyes are the product of a 19-year-old experience with your own past, which means that you're going to make the same old mistakes you've always committed. When you begin to experience yourself and the world through the eyes of your teacher, it means that the teacher is connected to a lineage, and that's called agape. Agape is like the wisdom tradition. You can't get it through books. You can't get it at Laney. You can't get it by me talking and you listening. It doesn't work that way, okay? So, long story short, I don't even know what your question was. Oh, about the self. Long story short, there comes a point where you begin to understand my intellectual space. Now we have a relationship. Now, two things happen as you begin to kind of figure out what this intellectual environment looks like. You're not going to understand it because let's just say that this is, hypothetically, it's a real situation. I am 60, you're 20. I have 40 years advanced. I've read more books, I've gone through experiences. So the idea of you understanding my intellectual capacity and environment, that's not possible for you. The only thing you have access to is emotions. But these emotions are no longer about you romancing this relationship. The intellectual space that you want to understand now, the only thing it can give you is moments of excitement and inspiration. And you'll become codependent, which goes contrary to your tradition. You know, this idea of self-sufficiency, independence, they no longer exist for you. And you have to you become the umbilical cord. In other words, there is this relationship, and in the middle there is this umbilical cord that connects you to me. I feed you, and you're nourished only by me, no one else. So you may go home to your boyfriend, but you may fantasize about me. You may sit with your boyfriend, but you long to have a conversation with him in a way that you'll have a conversation with me. And eventually what's going to happen, your relationship with your boyfriend will fall apart. So if, for example, you're on the spiritual quest, but you have a companion, there's a good chance that your relationship is going to fall apart because there comes a point where your emotions, your thoughts, and the language and the emotions behind the language are going to be so intense that your companion is not going to understand. And you're going to live a very solitary life despite being in a relationship. And it's not going to survive, okay? Because you happen to be in grade 5, your companion happens to be in grade 1, and there's a world of difference. If I happen to be a good teacher, all teachers are corrupt at some point, to some degree, but if my task is to eventually set you free, there comes a point where I'm going to introduce you to this skill called falausha, that there is enough of me and my culture inside you that you don't need to be in my physical presence anymore. And what usually happens is you will stop calling me, you will stop texting me, you will stop walking into my office, and I'll see you maybe once a week, then once every 2 weeks, and once every year, and then the connection will discontinue. There is enough substance inside you so that you could nourish yourself and be sustained by yourself. And you'll go on this quest. And what you're looking for is what we call agape. Now you're looking for the kingdom of God or the wisdom that lives inside you. And by this point, you've come to realize no one can give this to you. Not Jesus Christ, not God, not yourself, not me, nobody. And you become very passive to life. And it's a very, very difficult place to be, because the other thing that teachers do is that they make life uninteresting for you. Accept the world in which they live and occupy. You know, it's kind of like when you fall in love with someone. You know, you hate pizza, but because they love pizza, you say, I'll have pizza. What happens to you, like 10 years of you disliking pizza? Yeah, that was 10 years ago. Now I'm in love with this man. He loves pizza, so I'm willing to have pizza every single day. Okay. And so hopefully by the time you get to the stage of phalausha and agape, you know, you have a better, more clear picture of who and what you are. And that's what they call narcia. You know. But the thing is that it just takes time. And then you have old teachers and you have young teachers, or seasoned teachers and novice teachers. Novice teachers are filled with hope. I'm going to change the world, I'm going to change this, I'm going to change that. A more seasoned teacher used to have those dreams and hopes, and eventually came to realize the complexities of teaching and learning. And so they're very, very reserved. There was a guy some years ago, his name was Franklin Meta Wolf. He was a mathematician, wrote 2 books, and eventually he left civilization. He went and lived in the woods. And he told his publishers that if anyone is interested in my work, you know, they should send you a letter, and if I agree, then they can come and pay me a visit. So these 2 mathematicians read his works. I think one was called Consciousness Without an Object, and became very fascinated. And so they wrote a letter. The publisher reached out to Franklin. Franklin said, okay, these 2 people drove. At a certain point, they had to walk for about, 5, 6, 7 days. They found his cabin, and they met this man and stayed with this man for about, I think, 3 years, and then they left him. So when you happen to be a very seasoned teacher, you become very, 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 very reserved. And one of the best teachers, for example, in the Western tradition, if you are able to read between the lines, is Jesus Christ. You know, he's not around for gossip. Once in a while he's inspired, he goes into the public, tells a story or 2, and then retreats back into his cave. Doesn't talk to his disciples very much. So, you know, and then when you read the gospel, one of them, I'm not quite sure which one it is, but he comes to a point where he says to all the people, including the Jews, that I'm not going to come back here again. I'm not going to teach anyone anymore unless you know and you've learned how to cry. Now, the symbolism of tears is that, you know, you have a toothache, you lose power, you lose control, and your ultimate language is tears. Your heart gets broken, you have no power to bring your boyfriend or girlfriend back into your life, they have left you, and you're desperate, and you're helpless, and then you sit and cry. You have cancer. There are no remedies out there, so you go to church and you sit and cry. And tears are the ultimate symbol of humility, that you are helpless and you need help. And by the time you shed tears, it means that you no longer can depend on humanity. It's kind of like Noah's Ark. Humanity is kind of destroyed in this flood. It's just you. It's just you. And if you have a dove, and dove becomes symbolic for, your prayers can be with words or silent. You send them out, and it's like a shot in the dark. Sometimes, the dove comes back telling you that, no, there are no dry grounds. Sometimes you have to wait and wait and wait, and all of a sudden, miracle happens. I think the tragedy for the people of this generation in this particular culture is that all the narratives that used to give human beings a decent amount of meaning, they've disappeared. So as a 19 or a 20-year-old, you really have to do a good amount of research to kind of figure out what you need to do with your life. And to do any research, and this particular research, there are no rewards for it. In other words, no one's going to give you an A or a B or a C. You're probably going to do this research for about 10, 15, 20 years. Once in a while, you sit back and you say, you know what? I divorced my wife. I walked away from my kids. I dropped out of school in hopes of getting somewhere. I feel like I'm getting nowhere. And so you're going to encounter a good amount of despair and disappointment and anger. And that's the point, those dark moments where you kind of lay in a fetal position. And like Peter, you bang your head against the wall and you say, my God, help me, because there's no one else that can. And you'll either reach a place of acceptance, or you kind of just, like Jesus Christ in the Gospel of Judas, you just hang yourself, you commit suicide. So, yeah. But before you're able to work with anyone, there has to be an element of attraction. You have to be attracted to something. And the most simple and the easiest and the cheapest way you can find yourself attracted to anyone is you look at them. I like the way you smile, Matt. I like your eyes. I like your hair. And there is something about your body language. I just like them. Now, whether or not I will continue to like how you express your emotions through language, that's a different story. People are like cars. Sometimes you just have a flat tire. That's easily fixable. Sometimes you just have a transmission problem. That takes more of a time. So you should look at people as machines. Some machines only have brake problems. Well, it's a day or two to sit and fix. Some people have like a very complex set of, engine issues. And you say, you know what? I like you. I like the color. I like the shape. I like everything about this car. But the amount of work required to fix this car, like 5 years, costs about $50,000. I'm not really at that stage yet. Or maybe I'm just beyond it anymore, So you should pick and choose. Be very, very selective who you want to work with. It's no different than, dating. If you're stupid, you date anybody, everybody. If you, damn it. Nathan.
Yeah, I have a question. It's kind of hard to articulate. How do you feel about the concept of philosophical suicide, especially in the context of students?
If you're an alcoholic and over time you've come to realize that the thing that used to give you lots of pleasure, maybe even freedom, is not the very thing that's holding you hostage. Okay. Good morning, Alex. There are two ways you can kind of deal with this problem. You can either say, I have no power over this, only death will set me free. And by this particular death, you mean once I physically die, as the hedonists used to say, or some Stoics, once you die, you won't feel. And once you start feeling life has no power over you, so stop thinking that death is going to be a tragic event. You know, once you die, you'll have no feelings, so don't worry about that too much. Just live your life the best way you possibly can. The other way is you go to AA and you look for a sponsor and you look for a really, really good teacher. And the task of this teacher is to give you mutu qabla an tamutu, that die before you're dead. If you can do this training and if someone can push you towards this training in the proper way, you can actually emotionally die to being tempted by alcohol and consuming alcohol, which means that if you're able to emotionally, intellectually, and physically die to being tempted by alcohol, by the time you're 35, alcohol will no longer have any power over you, which means that now you can live your life, hopefully in a way that's no longer addictive to things that can damage you. So, suicide is an interesting phenomenon. I don't know much about philosophical suicide because these are just like two very, very heavyweight, concepts. Philosophy in itself, I think it takes me maybe a semester just to talk about philo, which is Sophia, and maybe another couple semesters to talk about Sophia, which is love, philosophia. Then you're talking about suicide. Suicide ultimately, before you actually do suicide, you do depression. Before you do depression, you struggle to put your life together and you begin to kind of bring about tools from all over the place to kind of fix your life, because depression, suicide, despair, confusion, irritation, they're all signals that you're lacking certain power over certain events in your life and you want this power back. And you try, and you try, and you try, and you try, and it doesn't work. I don't know how many of you are aware that Iran was attacked. That's where I'm from. I don't know how many of you are aware about how the Middle East was mapped and remapped in the 1900s a few times. I don't know how many of you are aware of how Truman brought Israel's creation, and I don't know if any of you in this class know anything about white paper generated by the Brits, how America became the superpower. And I suppose the point I'm trying to make is, and I don't know if any of you in this class know how digital money is moving around. When you begin to study the dark space of the politics of life, at a certain point, you only have a couple of options, really. I just want to shut off my brain. I don't want to think about this stuff, and I don't want to know any more of this stuff because there isn't much I can do. I mean, when you understand how all these cameras, how all these satellites, how all these drones are taking notes on people's movements, at a certain point you say, what exactly about my life do I have power over? The only way you can set yourself free is by no longer exposing yourself to thoughts and to news. That's one form of suicide. The other is you say to yourself, I don't care about Laney, I don't care about my position at Laney, I don't care about any tables of chairs of life. I want to fight the system. Consider Angela Davis. She's a young woman, she is on a tenure track to become a full-time professor at UCLA. She gets herself involved in the political world, and all of a sudden her tenure track is retracted. She's kicked out. And that's another kind of suicide, And that you have to become really indifferent to a whole host of things that people like me, possibly you, run after on a daily basis. You have to understand that the genius of someone like Malcolm X or Mahatma Gandhi, they're not about houses and sex and cars and family and children. They're not about those things. They're like in love with the world of ideas, you know. Or you can find, you know, or perhaps the Western hero, if not Socrates, at least Jesus Christ in the Gospel of Judas. It's an amazing story, the Gospel of Judas, which was founded around the year 2000. The Gospel was sent to a university in Texas or Pennsylvania. The paper was in this machine. The machine ultimately spits out this date. This Gospel was written around 180 years after the death of Jesus Christ. You know, it's approximately the same time that the Gospel of John was written, about 100 to 120 years after the death of Jesus Christ, you know. And so what you have is this guy coming forward in this particular Gospel. And then for those of you who like to kind of look at this stuff more metaphorically, symbolically, esoterically, the only thing I'll tell you is the following. If you want to kind of chart this, is that in the Gospel of Mark, what you have is Jesus, and replace Jesus with wisdom. That's all you got to do. Okay, whether it's Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha or your father or your mother, they're all the same. What they all possess is experience, and behind this experience, it lives wisdom. For some, wisdom remains abstract. For some, wisdom comes down and takes a practical application. You bring it down here and you apply it. And about 90% of what you thought wisdom, you trash it because they're useless in the real life world. And 10% you keep because they're useful. So what you have in the Gospel of Mark is wisdom being misunderstood. Wisdom is misunderstood by your own people, by you yourself even have doubts in the garden. You have this guy saying, you know, I think this is a bit too much for me. I want to give it up. So what you need to understand about wisdom, it's always going to be misunderstood. And that's the lesson you should get from the Gospel of Mark. It's always misunderstood. So for those of us who are parents and have children, and you try to knock some sense into their thick skull, the truth is, your wisdom as a father, as a mother, as a sibling who care for your younger sister or brother, they're never going to get it. And eventually what's going to happen to your wisdom is going to be on the cross and it's going to die. The Gospel of Mark is about 40 years old, 40 years after the death of Jesus. Then you have the Gospel of Matthew. Again, remove Jesus, it's only wisdom. This particular Gospel, about 40 to 60 years after the death of Jesus, okay? What you have in the Gospel of Matthew is the following. Initially, what you will do with the piece of wisdom that you have is you will try to share that wisdom with the people that you know. Initially, Malcolm only gives his wisdom to black folks. That's what we do. You give your wisdom to your kids, okay? You take care of your own family, okay? Then you realize that doesn't work too well because no prophet is ever welcome in his hometown. Your kids will not receive you. Your people will not receive you. Why? Because your people have a tradition, have customs, have rites of passages. Wisdom always go against tradition, always. Okay? Which means that your brother is going this way, your wisdom is going this way. You think your brother is going to receive you, but Allah shall come to realize he's not. Okay. And then you'll get to the Gospel of Luke. Gospel of Luke is about 50 to about 65 years after, written after the death of Jesus. In this particular Gospel, you come to realize that Jesus, having come to understand that the experience of Mark was disastrous. The experience of Matthew was disastrous. You know what? I'm going to be like Malcolm. Anyone who knocks on my door will open. And anyone who's willing to sit at my table and eat, I will give. White, black, brown, blue, yellow, orange, it doesn't matter. So in the Gospel of Luke, what you realize that the Gospel of Luke becomes a universal gospel. It's there for everyone, not just for the Jews, for everyone. Okay? Then you become a Socrates. I'm a citizen of Athens, or I'm a citizen of the world, not just Athens or Greece. Okay? Then you get to the Gospel of John, which is about 120 years, and it took a long, long time for this gospel to be approved by the church. And the problem with the Gospel of John is the following. There comes a point where Jesus, in this particular gospel, or wisdom, comes to realize it can be told in a story, as you have in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because these are three Gospels, what we call synoptic Gospels, and what they have in common, you ask Jesus a question, he tells you a story. But all three Gospels, what the conclusion is, wisdom is always misunderstood. Why? Because it has to fit language. And what happens to language? Well, language goes inside your head. Your head is filled with your own personal experiences, biases, prejudices, history. So you're going to interpret those stories the way you see fit. So you realize what you do, you will never receive Jesus, but you are always going to receive your own biases. Now, the Gospel of John is wise enough to know that people are going to always contaminate what they hear. So he says, you know what? Instead of telling people stories, I'm going to be a magician. I'm going to go like this, and all of a sudden in my hand you will see a box filled with 24 Krispy Kreme donuts. And then all of you will run out of this class, tell your friends and tell your relatives and parents, and when we meet on Thursday, this class will be packed. Magic. Words do not transform people, but magic does. Okay. Even in the Gospel of John, Jesus comes to realize that inspiration is short-lived. You can inspire people, you can excite them, you can have, mass movements, but after a while, people have no choice but to go back to their own pathetic lives. That's what we do. Someone very close to you dies and you begin to ask big questions, and they are exciting. But time passes, and then, our good friend here is fasting. I'm not sure if she's doing fasting of the body, or fasting of the tongue, or fasting of the eyes, or fasting of the ears, or fasting of the nose, or fasting of the mind, or fasting of the soul. But she is fasting, regardless. She is weak. Once in a while she thinks about poor people, homeless people. Once in a while when she's breaking her fast and she hears the Quran being recited, maybe she'll shed some tears. Maybe for the first time in many, many, many months, she feels very communal. She begins to appreciate food, her body, her health. But this is short-lived. Once this fasting period is over, she's going to go back to the person she's always been, forgetful, taking things for granted. So the Gospel of John comes to realize that wisdom, it doesn't matter what it does for you. It can give you a dream, it can give you moments of inspiration, but they're all short-lived. The Gospel of Judas is very, very interesting. As long as you have a physical body, you will never reach happiness. Temptation is always around the corner. Boredom, frustration, irritation, agitation, anger, vengeance, the desire for power. They're always in play. The 7 deadly sins. He comes to realize that teaching anyone is a very, very difficult task. So he does something really interesting. People desire the wrong things. They pray towards the wrong gods. At a certain point, Jesus in the Gospel of Judas, or wisdom, says, I no longer want to be here. Give my body to Pontius Pilate, to the Romans. And once the Romans have my body, my soul can go back to God. And what you realize is this is a really, really insightful human being, Jesus in the Gospel of Judas. He's tried all sorts of magic tricks to inspire people, to change people, to transform them, only to realize it's a nearly impossible task. So he just gives up and he walks away completely. There is the philosophical suicide expressed by Albert Camus, but to talk about that, you have to talk about the myth of Sisyphus. to talk about the myth of Sisyphus, you have to talk about death a little bit. Anyone else? Elham, yes. Elham. Sophia. Kamal. Tyler.
I'd like to hear more about the Sisyphus and really philosophical suicide. Death.
Yeah. There is a Hindu scripture. What is it called? I forget the name. There are two characters in this particular book. One is called Yama, who happens to be the king of death, and the other is Nachakitas, who has disappointed his father a couple of times, asked his father the wrong question. You know, when my kids were younger, sometimes, the light is red, you stop and you're eating a burger and there's a homeless person to your right or to your left, and your son or your daughter look at you and say, "Dad, won't you give him a $50 bill? I saw you put one in your pocket." I said, "No. Just give him your bill, it's okay." "No." And then I suppose in the mind of a 2-year-old, you sit back and you say, I thought my father was a kind man. I don't think he is. I thought he was generous and compassionate and this and that. And so while Nachakitas and his father are sitting at the altar and praying to the gods, his father says, "I'm going to give you a cow," to the god Yama, or to some god. And the father says, the son looks at the father and says, "Dad, you keep promising to give these old, almost dead cows to the gods. Why not give a healthy one to the gods?" And the father says, "Shut your mouth, man. Just be quiet. These cows are almost dead. These are the cows I want to give. Money is important. Don't you understand anything?" And, unless you become a child, you can't enter the kingdom of God. Kids are innocent. They don't really care about money, the things that adults care about. They're very like the original, authentic existentialists. They're very, very honest. And the third time that his son asks that his father should give, young, healthy animals to the gods, the father says, "You ask me one more time, I'm going to give you to the king of death, Yama." Dialogue with the Death. That's the name of the book. I think it's called Katha Upanishad. And so, and I won't talk about the number 3 in numerology that has profound significance, but anyways, the kid finds himself in the world of Yama, death. But death isn't there. He's like around, like Zeus, having sex with mortal women probably. So he waits for 3 days. And all of a sudden Yama shows up and asks this kid, "How long you been here?" "Been here for 3 days." "Oh, 3 days. So you have 3 wishes. Whatever you want, I'll give them to you." So the first thing that the kid says, "When I go back home, I want to have chicken tikka masala with garlic naan and dosa." Beautiful stuff. What's the second wish? "I won't have a Tesla." What's the third wish? "I want to know what happens when we die." And the king of death looks at him and says, "The first wish is good. The second wish is good. But this third wish, not even the gods make such request. Change it to something else. How about marriage? How about children?" He says, "No, because it's only in death that self-knowledge can be attained. I want that." So, one of the things about Sisyphus, King Sisyphus, is that death is scary. not just because you may get sick and die, but because you'll be forgotten. I don't know if you can appreciate the gravity of this. I don't know if you have a girlfriend, but imagine tonight you go home and she breaks up with you. And then she doesn't answer your calls, doesn't reply to your texts, and the following day you see her holding hands with another. It's like 5 years of history that you've created with her. Meant nothing. Like all went into a black hole. You don't exist in body, mind, or spirit. You're completely gone. And the truth is, I mean, relationships take time, take energy. They have dreams and hopes in them. I mean, they are your life, man. And all of a sudden, you see her with someone else. It's devastating. And it's not like you're at a place where you accept, the blessing and the curses of life equally. You're not there yet, And so you're devastated, you're depressed, you're angry, you pick a fight with anyone around, and, sometimes you're tempted to jump from a bridge or cut your jugular with a razor. I mean, it's really sad. The first thing you need to understand is that you're talking not about an ordinary human being, you're talking about a king. A king has a lot of power, but in the presence of death, you have no power. So that's the first thing you need to understand. Whatever power you and I think we have, the moment you become aware, not just intellectually as an abstraction, but you're aware of it, you understand it, and you feel it. The Trinity is complete. Body, mind, soul, death is right here. What are you going to do? And it can be an inspired moment, and you'll be very lucky if it's an inspired moment, because it stays on your shelf for about 5 minutes or maybe 5 hours, and then it disappears, and then you can kind of take the various aspects of love very, very seriously. If it stays with you permanently, you're not going to be digestible to society, to anybody. You'll become like Thomas Anderson. You're going to live in room 101. You're always going to be in conflict. You'll have no friends. You're always going to be in doubt. And you're always going to be looking for a Morpheus, someone who can give you a way out of death or misery. So what Sisyphus does is, one day when Zeus is not home, kind of goes to paradise and goes into various closets that Zeus has in hopes of finding a way to combat death. And that's another thing that you need to understand. Human beings are always looking for immortality. You write a book. You try to take your companion you just met to Hawaii, and that Hawaii is supposed to act as a super glue, that no man could ever compete with the experience you have given your companion. That's what we do all the time. That you pray and you cry and you remain eternal, immortal in the eyes of God. That's what we desperately want. That you read the Bible not because you love God. You read the Bible because you want the wisdom of God inside you. And once you have the wisdom of God inside you, no one really needs to go to church and pray and wait for a revelation. They just can come to you. You are their God. That's what we want. We are all competing for immortality and eternality. Okay? And so that's what Sisyphus wants. But Zeus catches him. So you want to be immortal. You never want to die. I'll give you that. But here's what you'll do. Every day, for the rest of your life, and your life is eternal, you will wake up at 7 in the morning. Hello. Toast some bagels, put some cream cheese and jam, make yourself a nice cup of coffee. And when you wear your shoes, you'll open your door, you'll see this huge rock that looks like a big, gigantic soccer ball outside of your door, and you will push it up the hill. And then you will stand at a certain point to the side because the rock has gotten too heavy, you're a little exhausted, and your task is really quite simple. You want to push this hill over the hill. You want to push this rock over the hill. But as you get very close to the top, you're just far too exhausted. You move to the side, and this big ball of a rock rolls back down to where it was. Then you walk down, and you push it up. Then you get tired. You stand to the side, it comes down. And you do this over and over and over and over again to no end. If that's a little abstract, I'll give it to you in this way. I remember when I had just come out of my mother's vagina, I screamed and I cried to be held by her and to be nursed by her. When I got a little older, I cried and screamed for a bike. Then I cried and screamed for a tennis racket. Then I cried and screamed for a girlfriend. Then I cried and screamed for a diploma. Then I cried and screamed for a wife. Then I cried and screamed for kids. Then I cried and screamed for money. Then I cried and screamed for health. And you realize that human beings are just Sisyphus. There is this ball that you have to roll up. It's called desires. And the assumption is once the desire is fulfilled, you'll be happy, eternally happy. But then, you're satisfied, you get bored, and you realize you're very much at the very bottom of this hill again, chasing it, another woman, another man, another bike, another this, another that. And then there is no way out of this mess except philosophical suicide, which is, let me examine the anatomy of this desire. Instead of just screwing this woman, let me look at her body as a map. Examine every piece of it. Enjoy it. It really takes a good amount of self-deception, but it's a self-deception that engages you with life. The way I sit, the way I talk, the way I drink my coffee, the way I place my hand on this cup. And it brings you to the moment. It removes the power of reflection from you. It's always good to mourn the death of another, but never the death of yourself. It's too big of a cross to carry and too heavy. But the benefit of reflecting on death and feeling on death is that it really does make a good amount of life irrelevant. And it opens up a lot of time and a lot of space inside you. If you don't know what to do with that extra time and that huge space, it'll probably lead you to depression. If on the other hand, you know what to do with that time and space, consider yourself to be very, very fortunate. I think you should visit that book by Eric Fromm, Escape from Freedom. We really do like tyranny. We like dictatorship. We like to be told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, where to do it. It gives us direction. If there was no one out there to guide you, you got to figure things out on your own. And that's one of the things about Adam and Eve in the Genesis story. In the garden, they know what to do, where to go, what to do, what not to do. When they experiment with this tree and they experiment with this food, and when they're expelled from the social structure, they land down here. And they realize that life is barren. And they are the only ones who can create life. No one else can. Once you know how ideas work, once you know how books are written, once you know how ideas are inspired, the next time you pick up a book, you say, okay, so this guy sat somewhere, maybe had some training, went to school, maybe there was a genius within him, and he sat and he wrote, and he wrote, and he wrote. And his ideas are interesting, but I'm not really interested in ideas. I'm interested in how ideas were created. And once you realize how ideas come about, I think you will stop reading books and you will sit and write your own book. The only problem is you need to be talented, man. You need to have lots of ideas. I mean, you need to be a very fertile ground, you know. And that's a difficult place to be, because all of us are limited by the limitations of your emotional life, your intellectual life, and by life I mean capacity. You only can read or write maybe 2 hours a day. That's all you can do. At a certain point, emotionally you'll be exhausted. You know, intellectually you'll be exhausted. Physically you'll be exhausted. So, is it, I mean, we would talk more, but let's, come on. Elham.
I kind of want to talk about what's going on today.
The what?
I kind of want to talk about what's going on today before
With the world? I don't know what's going on. Let me see. How can I give it to you? Yes. به کشت خاطرم جز غم نرویه، به باغم جز گل ماتم نرویه، به صحرای دل بی حاصل ما گیاه ناامیدی هم نرویه. If that's a little too difficult to grasp, since you don't speak Persian, I'll give you a one-liner from Hafiz. The first 4 lines I gave you, they were from Baba Tahir, a very unique sect in the northern part of Iran. The biggest sin that you will ever have in your life and you will ever commit is the sin of knowing too much. It leads to paralysis. What protects you right now is you are so naive, which is a really good thing in regards to marriage. And you're so naive in regards to having children. And your naivete will drive you towards marriage and having children. But then you will be touched with the wisdom of marriage and wisdom of having kids in a foreign land. And then you will know. And then there are moments where you won't admit to yourself that you will curse yourself for being married and being a mother, because you have no way of protecting your kids. Your question is, what's happening with the politics? I'll give you a very, 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 very quick one-liner. You take the oil that exists in Venezuela. Why do you do it? You do it because you knew months in advance you were going to destabilize the Middle East. You knew that the Persians are going to destroy Hormuz, where food is crossed, where oil is crossed, you know. And once you know that you're going to destroy the Middle East and oil is going to be scarce, well, how do you protect that? Your people, your country, your economy. Well, you go to a different land. You seize their assets. And once you find yourself in a comfortable position, now you can go and, destroy other people's lives. Is it about liberation? Maybe. There's a branch of it. Is it about democracy? Maybe another branch of it. Why do you think money is being digitized right now? People carry less cash, use more credit cards. Everything you do is being watched. What can you do? Nothing. If you read Romans in the Bible, what God tells human beings, you're just maggots. You're maggots. You're ragged dolls. Your life means nothing. Your desires, purpose, agendas, hollow. And that's just one tiny example. If on the other hand you're gullible and you don't know much about politics, you don't really care about it because you're too busy figuring out why your dad did this to you and why your mom did that to you. If you're self-centered in that particular way, and you have every right to be, because human beings need to be comforted and safeguarded, that's fine, then you're not going to know. And as long as you don't know, you're going to continue to assume that your life belongs to you and you have control over everything. Once you do know, then do what exactly? You're a Muslim, no? Do you know the evolution of your own prophet? How eventually he came to carry the sword and fight people? He talked to them for 10 years. 10 years. Do you know how long it took us human beings to create language, spoken words, alphabets, stories? It took millions of years, Alham. There comes a point you say, man, we created this wonderful thing called words with which we can communicate our thoughts, our feelings, our despair with another human being or with a culture. There comes a point where it just fails. And what's the last resort? You give up. You chop their heads off. I mean, that's devastating. Human incompetence. So, this class is supposed to inspire you and excite you. You guys look bad. I mean, consider John Rambo in the movies Rambo. A guy who believes in politics, in government, in freedom, in democracy, in life. Walks away. His sin? Knows too much. Imagine I'm your husband. You're happy until you read my journal. Now you know too much. So, anyone else? Tyler.
Mine probably heavy.
You see that, people? Diversity, inclusion,
Equity.
equity, that's right.
Mine's not really heavy. I was just thinking this out. Earlier, you said you won't go into the profound significance of the association.
The what?
The profound significance of the
Number 3.
The what?
I agree. You want to know about the profound significance of the as well.
I would.
We all want to know.
You guys want to know what a threesome looks like? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Tia.
Throughout history, there's been, and I don't know anything too much about politics and world history. I need to take some more classes, but I feel like there's been like revolutions and people have come together at some time and something's happened like to have the spark change, right? Do you think that educating us on, or not us, but just the world in general, maybe starting earlier on how certain things has happened in the past, like the remapping of the Middle East, the remapping of Africa, how different countries have been taken over. Do you think that educating us, because I feel like I'm older, but this generation, I feel like they're different than past generations, and maybe they're more receptive to do something about it than just sit back and accept what's going on. Like I'm guilty of cutting off the TV because I'm trying to disconnect and preserve my peace. But do you think that maybe teaching, I don't know, I just feel like something has to change in this world. But will it? I mean, I don't know. It would be like naive. I don't know.
No, it is what it is. I think Trump was right. It is what it is. Look, you know what trauma is? So let me explain how trauma comes about. Some traumas are positive, some traumas are negative. Some traumas are instantaneous. Some traumas need a lot of rewinding and replaying for it to actually take root. Trauma is something that never leaves you. Okay. If I am your son and you have caught me smoking and it's something that you don't want me to do, you can cause trauma. In other words, you break the door, you slap me, you take the drugs away, you trash them, you put me on lockdown for a couple of days. That's a very traumatic experience. Now, I may change. That depends on how addicted I am, how habitual this particular exercise has been for me. If I'm like a recent smoker or I've been doing it for 5, 6, 10 years, okay? Then you catch me again. Then you catch me again. And every time you catch me, you inflict more trauma. In other words, negative experiences. I'm not talking about fear. I'm not talking about a moment where I react negatively to something that you have done, then I forget. Trauma is something that lives inside you and grows inside you. And it follows you like a shadow. Now that is a good trauma to have inside you. What I can tell you, and this is something I recently kind of thought about, I realized that when I had the triple bypass, it was a traumatic experience for me in the sense that every time I grab something to eat, every time my left shoulder or my chest aches a little, all I see is death. Every time I go downstairs to build yet another structure and I realize my body is beginning to fail me, I think about death. Every time my wife says, let's do A, B, C, D, I think about my time being wasted by going to Disneyland or Monterey or coming to class and talking. And you need that particular trauma to live inside you. I'm not talking about, it's kind of like, you have to appreciate the fact that you had a boyfriend or a girlfriend for 5 years, they dumped you, and now you don't trust people as much. That's a good trauma to have because next time you walk into a relationship, you'll be far more cautious. Now, positive traumas usually take time to morph into positivity. In other words, you make a decision, you follow through, it backfires, you're devastated, it takes you 5 years to recover. At the end of the 5-year period, the insights, the wisdom that live inside you is invaluable, beautiful. But you had to pay a price for that. And every time you find yourself falling for another human being, this trauma shoves its head forward. It says, don't forget me, humans are not meant to be trusted. And you retreat. And then in retreating, you begin to reflect, what sort of questions should I ask? What things do I need to pay attention to? Okay. If you don't get to a traumatic moment where reflection and insight and wisdom are about, what you have is a trauma that morphs into profound negativity. It becomes disastrous. It never leaves you, and it hinders your growth and maturity and your powers to think. All you become at this point is you just become an emotional junkie. You just feel, but you can't think. You know. So, I mean, look, you're a black, young, attractive woman. And what you should notice about the culture in which you and I live is this racism, the sort of words that we use, equity and diversity and inclusion, they're hollow. When you walk into culture, you can feel it, you can smell it, you can taste it. And you thought that all these books, people like Angela Davis and Cornel West and all these other people coming forth as the messiahs, figureheads of these particular tradition, have done something to educate both black people, white people, yellow people, brown people, but no. Education is far, far, far more complex and difficult than simply changing, creating some superficial narratives. It doesn't work. I mean, all you gotta do is just go to YouTube and type Karens in its engine, and you'll find millions of behaviors that are just unsavory. It's again something we talked about, I think, in this class last week, that diversity and inclusion, equity, they're just hollow words. They look good and they sound good on bumper stickers, and they can throw them around. My deans do it all the time. The president does it. Everybody does it. I myself do it. But the truth is, it's just stupid. And it's mostly dishonest, but that's how you can survive, through a good amount of dishonesty. I mean, look at the grades I give. It's a stupid way of doing business with people. I mean, I know that growth takes place in time. I mean, imagine if I was like a governor when Malcolm X was in jail or in prison, and then I was like a Republican. And I said, well, we have this young kid, and we have to feed him, wash him, clothe him. That's like taxpayers' money. Why don't I just execute him and take that money and give it to someone else? It's a good idea. But you realize that all of a sudden, time enters, psychologically Malcolm changes, he's exposed to a different set of people, different set of ideas, and all of a sudden he becomes a prophet. You could give Malcolm an F when he is 19, but all of a sudden as an instructor, you'd be embarrassed to look him in the face and say, oh, Malcolm, you're 35 now. Man, I can't believe, how you turned out. I am so sorry for having given you an F. My bad, I'm just stupid. And that's the thing. Grades are the stupidest way of assessing anybody. So if I may use a colorful way, just a fucked up way to do business with anybody. There is no other options there. Because then, notion of justice, one person comes in like 5 minutes before class, the other person wakes up at 6, drives all the way here. And, you begin to calculate things. And you say, well, maybe the grading system is not bad. So listen, thank you for wasting my time. And I'm sorry to have wasted yours. It's good to see you. Is it time, by the way?
Yeah.
So have a nice day. Take good care. Don't check out any books. Don't read too much. Don't think too much.
Thank you.